A lot of us like to sneak into local cafes to get work done. But what if you had your own workplace with a free cafe inside? The Shop is serving up unlimited lattes, cold brew, and cappuccinos 24/7, plus a rotating selection of local blends, so your favorite coffee shop comes to you. Fuel your productivity at the Shop Workspace. Get details on memberships, day passes, and take a virtual tour at shopworkspace.com.
This is Your City Could Be Better, because it could be. I'm David Plotz. If you love your city and still complain about it, you're in the right place. Air travel is one of the true miracles of the modern age. You can travel safely anywhere in the United States in a few hours, anywhere in the world practically in less than a day. And yet, for frequent air travelers, it is also the subject of endless whining and complaint. The discomfort, the TSA waits, they charged me for a bag, I missed my connection. The one thing, however, that almost anyone can agree on in vacation season, especially during summer travel, is that their city would in fact be better if they could take a trip away from it cheaply on a plane, which is why I'm so glad to have Scott Keyes as my guest on Your City Could Be Better. Scott is the founder and chief flight expert of Going, an app for cheap flight alerts, which was formerly known as Scott's Cheap Flight. Scott has also been on a bunch of CityCasts over the years. Scott, welcome to Your City Could Be Better.
David, thank you so much for having me.
So what is the best flight deal that you have seen in the past few months?
In the past few months, there were a few flights out to Hawaii under $250 round trip that it's just, Hawaii, especially being on the West Coast, one of the best parts of being here is being able to get out there in 4 or 5 hours. And especially if you can do that for less than I used to pay to fly back home to Ohio. So I am partial to those living on the West Coast.
Why do cheap flights exist at all? This is something every time I've heard you on a podcast, I've always been like, is this just simply a mistake by airlines, or is it a strategy by airlines, some combination thereof?
So I'll give you a one sentence version and then I'll unpack it a little bit. One sentence version is airlines used to make most of their money from economy airfare. Whereas today, they make most of their money on things other than economy airfare. And that's why we have cheap flights today. What changed is it used to be airfare was actually dictated. The amount you had to charge, the airlines had to charge was dictated by the central government. And that changed in the late 70s, early 80s. And then airlines started to get creative. They started to charge, add more premium seats, first class, business class, premium economy. They started to make more money from cargo, started to make more money selling bags, selling seat selection, and especially nowadays, those credit cards where airlines make billions and billions of dollars off those relationships with banks, off selling points and miles and credit card to consumer. And so the economy airfare that you or I are paying to actually travel somewhere, that is more that is secondary now in their thinking. It's almost like a way to get folks in the ecosystem that now they can hawk their credit cards to us. Now they can try to get us on bags or other parts of the business that are more profitable, a higher profit margin for the airlines.
So if I am looking for cheap flights on Going or waiting for a cheap flight alert, am I more likely to get a cheap flight if I am booking something way far in advance, or if I'm booking something like at the moment, just for tomorrow?
Almost always way far in advance. One of the biggest myths in airfare is the myth of the cheap last minute flight. It used to be the case 50 years ago that last minute and cheap could be synonymous. You think of movies where somebody just shows up at the airport, they pick up a place from the ticker board and they go there and they get a standby flight or something that's pennies on the dollar. That is not the way airlines charge it nowadays, because what they realized, the airlines, is that the folks who were buying those last minute tickets, a flight tomorrow, a flight next week, weren't typically family travelers. It wasn't vacationers. It was actually business travelers who didn't know their schedule until late and who didn't care what the flight cost because they weren't paying, their boss was. So airlines actually realized, you know what, we're going to make more money if we jack up the price on those last minute seats rather than slash the price. Now, there's one exception here. There's one opportunity where you can get cheap last minute flights, and that's by using points and miles. it still is kind of like that situation 50 years ago where you would see cut rate prices for last minute unsold seats, but only for paying with points and miles. Because again, that's not typically what a business traveler is doing. They're paying cash. It's their company credit card. And so if an airline says, you know what, we have some empty seats, we're going to try to fill them. We know a vacationer's unlikely to be booking it because they probably booked it months ago. Maybe we can get it in that points and miles universe where you have some of those last minute opportunistic travelers.
All right. So this is a podcast about cities and cities being better. So are there particular cities for some reason where it is easier to get cheap flights? What are they? Why?
Yes, there are. It varies significantly, but the biggest thing is just a question of how much competition there is between airlines. It's not how far you fly. It's not, how big the city is. This is a reason why flights actually tend to be more expensive in cities like Dallas or Atlanta or Minneapolis, where one airline tends to dominate. So the cities that we've seen getting cheaper, for instance, in the past 12 months, we've seen actually San Diego and Portland, Oregon, both get quite a bit cheaper in the last year. And that's largely a function of airlines adding more seats and more flights. San Diego, 15% more seats year over year, the biggest increase of any city. Portland in the second biggest increase. Where you tend to see cities getting pricier, New York. So good for folks who want to visit the West Coast, a lot cheaper, getting cheaper. But for folks trying to get to the Big Apple, be prepared to pay extra.
What about a number of cities in the CityCast network, or like my own city of DC, are cities with multiple airports? Does having multiple airports make the city cheaper? Is there usually a cheap airport?
It does tend to make things cheaper. You tend to see folks have some amount of substitution between, willing to fly to Dulles if the price is cheap enough, willing to fly to BWI if the price is significantly cheaper than DCA. Folks might pay a small premium to fly to DCA, which is a lot, obviously, closer to the city center. But you don't see that as an unlimited preference, at least for these sort of price-conscious vacationers. So it helps bring prices down. But it's not a complete silver bullet in terms of making things cheaper.
Okay, I'm going to change gears a little bit. You're in Portland, a city with a famous airport. I'm interested in kind of airports, because a lot of the experience that one has flying is the experience of the airport. So what is the best airport you've been to?
Oh, man. So if we're talking just about the U.S., Portland is up there. And not just because of the iconic carpet, not just because we actually had a big remodel renovation over the past few years. I don't know if you've been there recently at all, David. It is gorgeous. I mean, this like tall timber roof ceiling, a very open air, trees growing in the middle, a lot of local flavor. And that just kind of, I think, sets the tone for visitors who are, let's just be frank, in a place that generally people are not having the best time. Most people don't love being in an airport. Most people, there are these rabid debates on how close to a flight you can get there because people don't want to spend extra time at the airport. And so I think having a pleasant space to be in, like the new Portland airport, is helping in terms of setting a nice tone. DCA, certainly up there in terms of my favorite airports. That one is less for the sort of tone and vibe and more for the efficiency. You have a terminal that's very easy to get through security and to your gate. And I think that's by far we'll get into what makes it go to our airport, but I think that's one of the most important things. But then especially once you get off a flight in DCA, you can just walk on over to the metro and be downtown DCA. I used to live off Union Station. I timed it once. 20 minutes getting out of the plane onto the metro and at my door. I mean, that's almost unheard of anywhere else. So that sort of proximity and efficiency is really, really important. And then I think San Diego is another that really speaks to me in terms of being a great airport. It's a beautiful flight in, right on the water, gorgeous. You feel that California air and vibe there. And they have it nicely set up with tons of windows, tons of views, so that you're not getting this sort of cloistered bunker effect that you used to get at the old LaGuardia, that you get at some airports like Memphis, San Diego. You feel nice, spacious. You feel like you can breathe.
That's great. So you hit on some of the elements that make an airport good. Are there any others? So efficiency, I totally agree about DCA, like that just the speed of in and out there can be amazing. But are there other elements that really help?
Absolutely. So let me start out with a few like must-haves for what makes a good airport. And it's kind of the unsexy stuff. It's minimal delays. You know, that it's kind of a taken for granted thing, but there's some airports that just have a lot more delays than others.
Name it. Name and shame, Scott.
JFK, SFO, LaGuardia. You know, those ones tend to, because of whether it's air traffic control, a lot of airports actually in Florida, because of the way that the air traffic control system is set up, they have a bottleneck effect going into Florida, and they tend to be, that's the quickest way to ruin your trip, is just to have a 50, 60, 70-minute delay, rolling onward, and especially if you've got a connection. So minimal delays. Second, quick security, a short walk from going to wherever you're getting dropped off, the train, a car, whatever, to get to your gate. I'll name and shame Denver as the opposite here, where, you get out of your car, you get into the terminal in Denver. First, you're going to have a long line at security. I used to that was my home airport for a while. Awful. I love Colorado. I love Denver. The airport there is awful. And it's partly a fact of the long lines that are always existing at TSA, but also because once you get there, unless you happen to be in the first terminal, you have to get on a train to go over to, I believe it's called B or C terminal. And then, those trains are constantly breaking down. You see these videos, photos of people, just jam packed waiting for trains, which aren't coming. Terrible. And so those are the sort of table stakes, if you will, of what makes a good airport. Few delays, short, efficient getting from the door to your gate, and then fast Wi-Fi. This is something that exists most airports nowadays. I'm old enough to remember when you were lucky if an airport had Wi-Fi. You might have to have a Boingo subscription or something to be able to get that. This is nice now that this is commonplace everywhere, but you notice it every once in a while when you're at a small airport and they don't have fast and free Wi-Fi.
One question we were thinking about is it better for your city to have an airport that is close to downtown or a bit farther out? Because like close to downtown sounds great, but maybe that you're in the urban traffic snarl, and outside it's kind of a more rapid, like it takes longer to get there, but it's just like less congested somehow.
As a traveler, I would prefer close to downtown. It doesn't come without its problems, which I'm glad you point out. And the biggest problem being you tend to have smaller airports if you're close to downtown. Denver, the biggest airport in the country, if not the world, in terms of the overall actual like footprint of it. It's out in the middle of nowhere. Right. Like you really have to haul to get out from downtown to Denver. But the benefit then is you can have, massive planes coming in. You've got a lot more space to be able to get more flights, more runway. So it's a trade-off. But there are other aspects too that I think that are really nice. This is more of like what makes an airport more than just efficient and actually makes it like a desirable, something that people might want to actually be talking about. And so those types of things. Now, local flavor. Have a sense of place that it feels like the city that you're in.
Who does that well? Like you mentioned, Portland does. I think Portland does do that well. Others you can cite.
Portland does that very well. I think Seattle, SeaTac does it quite well. Part of that, I think, a big aspect, frankly, is just having big windows. I think having those views, and then having shops that are reflective of local, whether it's actual local brands, local food establishments. That's always a really nice thing. And then street pricing, ideally on those. Newark was one of the ones that got in big trouble because they would charge, upwards of $20 for a bottle of beer at some bars in Newark Airport. I mean, just horrendous. And so I think there's been a push lately to think of airports as more than just a sort of nickel and dime money grab, and or less of a nickel and dime money grab and more of like a introduction to the city. We want to create a good impression on travelers so that their first sense of being here is, I like this place. I'm enjoying it.
What other, so you mentioned Seattle, Portland doing a good job of kind of introducing their city to visitors. Are there others? I mean, I think of Las Vegas, where you can have kind of a mini casino experience in the airport, or at least the last time I was there. Are there others you can think of?
Certainly. So I think Nashville and New Orleans both do a good job of incorporating sort of the local music, local vibe, excitement, party, good time, right? Nice to be there. They do a good job of incorporating that in some of the decor, have sometimes, local music in the terminal, that sort of thing. Miami as well sometimes can have a good sense on local place. The problem with Miami is just how long it is to get from one side of the terminal to another. I mean, you could be walking for upwards of a mile or two if your gate is at another end of the terminal.
My one memory of Miami, you have to correct me if I'm wrong and I'm slandering Miami. I once went through the Miami airport and I feel like it wasn't sufficiently air conditioned, and that was just deeply unpleasant as a traveling experience.
You would think of all the airports that could really benefit from high quality, well circulated air conditioning. You would think Miami would be up there. That was my impression as well. It's been a number of years since I've been there, so my information might be dated as well. But yes, another one of those that you don't really notice until it's gone.
Is there anything about an airport that would literally make you skip traveling there?
I would say one of my bigger gripes. It's hard to say it would make me skip it, but there can be like just a sense of, is it worth it? Versus if you've got like deciding between two cities on a knife's edge. One of the biggest gripes for me is a dad with two young kids, when the car rental pickup is not at the terminal.
I know where you're going with that. Yeah.
And you have to take a bus to get out there. And that bus, if you're lucky, you might only be waiting 10, 15 minutes, could be longer. You're having to schlep all the bags, the kids, the car seats, or you're not, you're leaving them with the spouse at the terminal, and then they're just sitting around for an hour and a half. Like, that just drives me nuts versus the airports where Salt Lake City, where you can just walk straight to the car rental pickup. It's right there. It's easy. Like, that type of thing is a godsend. And so I'm loath to say I would not go to a city for that, but if it's like right there in deciding between two places, it's a factor for sure. The other things that are nice to have come up in my mind, kids' playgrounds. This is something that I had not ever really noticed before having kids. And now, if there's an airport that it doesn't even have to be big, just something small to let the kids get their wiggles out before a flight, that makes a huge difference for any of the folks, parents traveling with kids. And I think is frankly a very, very inexpensive investment for the airport, for the city. And so that's one of those that if I could be king for a day, add one thing to every airport, it'd be a good indoor playground at basically every airport, in every terminal too. You don't want to have to kind of schlep over to the other one.
The new Burlington, Vermont airport, which I go to sometimes, has that, and also it has sort of a slightly more adult version, which has ping pong table and a big chessboard and a couple of things which are more like your teenager would enjoy. My teenager and I enjoy.
Yeah, those are fun. Those are whimsical. It's good for Instagram, but I think of the kids ones as the more like, this is serving a specific purpose of burning off some of those kids' energy so that they have a much better flight and their parents have a much better flight.
I'm going to name these CityCast cities. We've talked about some of them already, but talk to me about our airports in our cities here. DC, Philly, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Nashville, Madison, Austin, Twin Cities, Denver, Salt Lake, Vegas, Portland, Seattle. You've mentioned Portland, Seattle, Salt Lake, Denver, DC. Any of the other ones pop out at you as having a notably good, notably bad?
Austin, very good if you're in the main terminal. If you're off in the sort of auxiliary terminal, you feel like you're in some sort of Twilight Zone yesteryear type of environment. Not a fan. Chicago. I mean, I think a big thing for me too is if the airport is connected to the local metro and easily, that you don't have to like take a local train to get to the actual metro to then get down to the city. You want efficiency with something like that. And I remember like being able to relatively quickly get from O'Hare to downtown when it's as quick to get on the train like it is there as it is to actually drive in the city. That's a win because that's and that's how I remember it being with DCA, that taking a taxi a lot of times wasn't actually going to save you any time versus taking the metro. And I think of that as that's a sort of ideal for airport infrastructure. Twin Cities, I remember being, modern, beautiful, a lot of great lounges. The fact of it being, and I think of this along with Salt Lake City as being a Delta hub. Delta's very good at protecting their hubs. And so whatever you gain in it being a nice airport, good lounges, well set up, you're losing in the extra Delta premium you're paying in airfare there, where prices on flights tend to be $100, $200 more expensive than they would be if you were in a city that doesn't have that monopoly.
Just a couple more slightly obsessive questions here. When you think about local businesses, you've talked about this already, and I when you mentioned Austin, I was just thinking about, I think they've got a County Line barbecue in Austin, and they've got a bunch of good like local taco places in Austin, and that certainly seems to be the trend these days is local distinctive restaurants. How do you think? Can you go too far in going local in your airport?
I think the only way that you would go too far is if a city is really well known for one thing, and then you just only, you have so many of that one thing. So I think of barbecue in Carolina or in Memphis or something like that, where it's delicious, but I don't always want barbecue, especially maybe not right before a flight. And so you want a bevy of options, especially if you've got picky kids. I think that's the main risk if you're talking going local. It's the best, most iconic local brands might be on a very narrow, specific type of food or trinket or something like that. That's, I think, the issue. The only other issue is, look, there's always a risk of cheapening the brand a little bit by putting it in the airport, because you're having to serve at a scale that they're not necessarily serving out in the actual restaurant in the city. And you're having to do so under a lot of constraints. Knives and stuff like that are very, it's essentially contraband. Sometimes they're chained to the walls. Like they have to be kept in almost like, a controlled substance in a pharmacy, have to be really tracked and carefully managed. And it's not ideal conditions to be able to operate a restaurant. So I think that's the risk, is that you might actually have a lesser version of that local brand when you're in the airport.
Is there a particularly weird or memorable local touch you've seen in an airport that you be like, oh, that is really exceptional? Good job, Memphis. Good job.
Yeah. Portland Airport has a movie theater built into Terminal C. It is, it's not showing feature films. You're not going to see Minions there. You're not going to see The Incredibles. It is showing local short, 7-8 minute documentaries. That is kind of perfect, frankly, for travelers, because your attention span, the amount of time that you have before your flight. And so you go in, there's 20 seats, you're hanging out, you get some little local vibe, local flavor. I find that delightful.
Do you have to pay for it, or you can just
no, it's totally free, totally unmanned. You just walk in, you can hang out. I'm sure there are teenagers making out in the back sometimes, but being able to actually just have this infrastructure that's very unique that you don't see but also like interesting and useful, not just kitschy. I love that. You think of something like in Singapore, the butterfly gardens or things that they have that are really just, wow, this is remarkable. I want to say in O'Hare, they have an indoor garden as well. That is, it grows some vegetables and herbs and stuff for some of the restaurants. Stuff like that I find is very like delightful when you find something that's not everywhere.
Wow, those are great examples. All right, last question of our main segment. What can listeners in CityCast Cities take away from this conversation to make their own city a little bit better?
Doing the parents in your life a solid by lobbying your airport, filling out that comment card. We need playgrounds. That will make everybody's life a lot happier, especially, look, even if you don't have kids, if you're sitting at the gate and you're tired of kids crawling all over the seats and treating it like a playground, send them off to the actual playground because now it's built. Number 2, easier rideshare pickup. This is actually one of my gripes, I believe, with
Good
Austin, that you actually have to, you've got to get out of the terminal, you've got to cross the road, you've got to go into a parking garage. It's this weird setup you have to really kind of walk quite a bit to get to where you're going to pick up your Uber, your Lyft. It's already happening on its own, but I know for a lot of folks, having more and bigger lounges, you go through, and with the proliferation of credit cards, lounge passes, you just see lines out the door at almost every airport for lounges. It takes time to build that sort of infrastructure, but I think as those start to come online, you're going to see more folks be able to benefit, because for the folks who are able to get into lounges or do want to, less waiting in line. And then the last thing, getting rid of the price gouging, the airport, doubling of price of beer, sandwiches or stuff, having something that's much more reasonable. I think you make up for it in brand equity and good feelings in the same way that Atlanta's Mercedes-Benz Stadium charges, it's a few bucks for a hot dog and, $5 for a beer, something like that. And people just love it. They're doing great. They might not make quite as much money as they would otherwise, but the good feelings and positive energy that's creating, I think, has a lot of value as well.
Let's go to our word on the street segment, our extra segment. So you've made your name, your fame, your fortune, your life around helping people find cheap flights. But cheap flights are, of course, just one way to make life, especially life in a city, cheaper. Do you have any other techniques or apps or tricks that make other aspects of your life less expensive that you are willing to share?
Oh boy, can it still be travel related? Because that's
it can be travel related, but it can't be a flight. No flight.
Okay. So you take your flight, you get where you're going, you've got your hotel, you've got your car rental, you need things like that. You don't want to overpay for those things either, right? And I think the biggest mistake that folks make is they book their hotel, they book their car rental, they book it once, and then they forget about it until they actually arrive beginning their vacation or their trip. What I'm trying to impress on folks is, instead of booking it once and then forgetting about it, car rentals and hotels are actually one of those things that you can rebook after you book if the price drops and recoup any of those savings. It's not like a flight where you actually have to prepay for it. For most hotels and car rentals, it's just a reservation. So, there's a car rental that I booked. It's upcoming in a few weeks. I booked it 6 months ago. Every week for the past 6 months, I've just set myself a calendar reminder to check on the price. It started out at $750 for this car rental for 1 week. Right now, it's down to $384. If I had just said it once and forgotten about it, I'd still pay $750 when I show up in a few weeks. But because I was checking, there's actually been 3 or 4 times when the price dropped. I canceled my old reservation, booked a new one, got it all the way down to $384. It's the same car. There's nothing different about it, but I'm just paying half the price of what I used to pay. So that's the biggest thing I think that folks miss when they're traveling, is you can do this for hotels, do this for car rentals, anything that you're not prepaying for. keep an eye on it after you book as well.
That's an amazing tip. I did not know that. I'm a 56-year-old person, and I did not know that. Wow. If he's that good on a hotel and a car, imagine how good he is on flights. Check out Going. Scott Keyes, founder of Going. Thank you for coming on Your City Could Be Better.
Thank you so much, David. It was great to chat with you.
That is all for today's episode of Your City Could Be Better. I'm your host, David Plotz. Our producers are Aria Bracci and Priyanka Tilve. Our music is by Carl Christensen. If you are enjoying the show, please tell your friends, rate the show, leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back next week with another conversation about how your city could be better. Safe travels.